The air inside the throne hall of Aeloria shimmered like liquid glass. Streams of golden light poured through tall crystal windows, scattering into colors that danced across the marble floor. Every surface gleamed, columns of pale blue stone, banners woven with silver thread, the scent of burning crystal incense curling through the air. Yet for all its beauty, James Carter felt none of its wonder. He felt only the weight of 100 alien eyes fixed upon him. 2 guards shoved him forward, their armor made of living metal that rippled with faint light. His boots echoed as he stumbled to a stop before the throne. He was no soldier now, no diplomat, no man of standing. He was an exile from Earth, stripped of title and purpose, standing alone before a world that wanted nothing to do with him. And at the center of it all sat the woman whose gaze could silence galaxies. Princess Selene of Aeloria. Her sapphire blue skin seemed to glow from within, as though stars had taken residence beneath her surface. Her long silver hair spilled over her shoulders, catching the light like threads of molten moonlight. The crown upon her head was delicate yet unyielding, a perfect reflection of the woman herself. The hall was silent until a voice, cold and amused, echoed through the chamber. "A human," murmured one of the nobles. "How quaint." Laughter rippled among the court, smooth and cruel. James kept his head lowered, jaw tight. He had faced war councils, political betrayals, and the quiet suffocation of disgrace. But this was a new level of humiliation. He had been captured by patrols near the outer territories, accused of trespassing on sacred land, and now stood accused of espionage. Selene rose from her throne. Her movement was graceful, her presence commanding. The laughter died at once. Her eyes, bright and unblinking, studied him. Not as one studies a criminal, but as one examines a puzzle yet to be solved. "You are James Carter," she said. Her voice was soft but carried like music through the marble. "Former diplomat of Earth's interstellar alliance. Exiled. Without home or banner." James straightened slightly. "That is correct, Your Highness. And yet here you stand, in my world, accused of stepping beyond the boundary of the Celestine Veil. That border is sacred to my people. Tell me, why?" He hesitated. The truth would sound pitiful. The lie might sound worse. "I was searching for a place where I would not be hunted," he said quietly. "Aeloria was supposed to be neutral. I meant no offense." The nobles hissed among themselves. "He lies. He must be a spy. Send him to the mines." But Selene's gaze never wavered. Instead, a flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps, passed through her eyes. She stepped closer, descending the marble steps until she stood only a few paces from him. Up close, her beauty was devastating, but there was something else behind it. Sadness hidden behind practiced serenity. "You have no world," she said. "No title, no claim. Yet you walk into the heart of an empire that devours outsiders. Either you are a fool, or you are braver than most." James managed a weary smile. "I have been called both, Your Highness." That small spark of defiance caused another stir among the courtiers. But before anyone could speak again, Selene turned back to the throne, her expression unreadable. She paused for several long moments. Then, with a calmness that silenced the entire hall, she said 3 words that changed the fate of 2 worlds. "I choose him." The chamber erupted. Voices collided in disbelief. Some shouted that it was madness, others that it was blasphemy. The High Consul himself nearly dropped his staff as he stepped forward. "Your Highness, surely you jest. You cannot mean." "I do," Selene said, her voice like a blade. "Let it be recorded. By decree of royal right, I, Selene of the Celestine line, take this human as my consort." James froze. He thought he had misheard. He looked up, eyes wide. "Your Highness, what are you?" But the princess did not look at him. She was already addressing the council. "You have all brought your sons and champions to court these past months. You have all plotted, whispered, and fought beneath my shadow. Today I end your games." Gasps echoed like thunder. The nobles shouted their protests, but she raised one hand, and silence returned. "Let every world hear it," Selene said. "The princess you called barren has chosen her path." Only then did she glance back at James, her gaze steady, calm, almost apologetic. And in that single look, he understood this was not madness. It was defiance. The guards released him. The nobles watched in horror. And James Carter, an exile with nothing left to lose, found himself bound to an empire that had no idea what it had just unleashed. That night, as the twin moons of Aeloria rose above the crystal towers, the city buzzed with whispers. The barren princess had chosen a human husband. The council would never allow it. And yet, the royal decree had been sealed in light and oath. No one could undo it without treason. James was escorted to the Eastern Palace, a labyrinth of glass gardens and floating terraces. He was given quarters befitting a prince, but every luxury felt like a cage. When Selene arrived later that night, dressed in a simple gown of pale silver, he stood to face her. "You must be wondering why," she said quietly. Her tone was softer than before, stripped of royal armor. "Why a princess would throw away her dignity to marry a stranger." James studied her face. The regal calm she wore in the throne hall was gone. She looked tired, human even. "I suppose there is a reason," he said, "and I doubt it is love at first sight that earned the faintest curve of her lips. You are right. It is not love. It is survival." And as her eyes glimmered beneath the soft light of the moons, she began to explain. The web of nobles who sought to replace her, the endless proposals meant to control her throne, the cruel whispers that she was unfit to rule because she could never bear an heir. The declaration today had been her rebellion. "By choosing you," she said, "I have forced their hands. They cannot oppose the decree without revealing their true intentions. To them, you are an unworthy human, but you are mine by law. That makes you untouchable. For now." James listened in silence, understanding the trap and the brilliance of it. "And what happens when they find a way around that law?" he asked. Selene looked at him for a long time. "Then we will face them together, or we will fall together. But I will not be a pawn in their games." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Do not think of this as kindness, James Carter," she said. "It is war, wrapped in ceremony." When she was gone, James sat by the window, staring at the endless lights of the alien city. Somewhere in those towers, nobles plotted his death. And somewhere, behind walls of crystal and pride, a princess had decided to fight her empire, with him as her weapon. He had no idea that this alliance of desperation would soon grow into something neither of them had planned, something that would change the fate of Aeloria forever. The days that followed felt like walking on glass. Every corridor of the palace gleamed. Every word spoken carried hidden edges. James Carter had been through political storms before, but nothing like this. The nobles of Aeloria were not simply powerful. They were ancient, cunning, and filled with quiet rage. And now they were forced to bow to the human who had stolen their princess from the hands of destiny. Servants greeted him with stiff politeness, their eyes averted. Courtiers offered rehearsed smiles, but the disdain beneath them was thick enough to choke on. Only Selene remained untouched by the poison in the air. She moved through the palace like a moon across a dark sky, graceful, untouchable, and followed by silence wherever she went. Their marriage ceremony had been swift, a union sealed not in affection, but in light and oath. The priests of Aeloria had spoken the ancient vows while thousands of crystal petals rained from the domed ceiling. Selene's hand had been cool in his, her gaze steady, unreadable. When the ceremony ended, the empire had witnessed a spectacle no one could undo. The barren princess bound to a human exile. Now, as dawn spilled gold through the palace gardens, James found himself sitting across from her at the breakfast table. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence between them was not hostile. It was simply heavy with what both already knew. Finally, Selene broke it. "They think this marriage will break me," she said softly. "They think by forcing me into defense, they will expose weakness. But I will show them what strength truly looks like." James looked up from his untouched plate. "And what role do I play in that?" Selene's eyes met his. You are the unexpected variable. The chaos they cannot predict. He almost laughed. I have been called worse. That earned a faint glimmer of amusement from her. I chose you because you are not one of them. You owe nothing to this court, this empire, or its politics. That makes you dangerous. Dangerous? He repeated, raising an eyebrow. I was a diplomat, not a soldier. Diplomats, she said, often survive wars that soldiers start. Her words hung in the air between them, sharp but strangely sincere. James leaned back, studying her. She looked nothing like the distant royalty he had first imagined. There was weariness in her posture, the kind born from years of carrying invisible burdens. Yet behind her composure burned something stronger than pride, resolve. In the days that followed, they became unwilling allies. Every public appearance was a performance. They stood side by side during council meetings, their hands occasionally brushing in silent acknowledgement. The nobles whispered, but none dared defy the royal decree. James played his part, listening, observing, and slowly learning the hidden rhythms of Aeolorian politics. At night, when the palace grew quiet and the towers glowed faintly with starlight, Selene would walk the gardens. The guards followed at a distance, but James often joined her. It began out of duty, but soon those walks became something else entirely. The gardens were unlike anything he had seen on earth. Flowers that shimmered like liquid glass. Trees that sang faintly when the wind touched them. The air was cool, fragrant with alien perfume. It was there, under the twin moons, that their walls began to crack. Selene spoke little of her childhood, but when she did, her voice softened. She told him of lessons in diplomacy and duty before she was old enough to play, of doctors and prophecies that had branded her barren before she had even understood what the word meant, of how the court had smiled to her face, then mourned her behind closed doors as if she were already dead. Every man who courted me, she said one night, her eyes on the glowing fountain, wanted my crown, not my heart. When they learned I could not give them an heir, their affection turned to pity. I became a symbol of failure. James listened quietly, his chest tightening. You do not owe them an heir to prove your worth. She looked at him, her silver eyes glinting. And yet an empire thinks otherwise. Silence fell again, but it was different now, warmer, closer. James noticed the way her voice softened when she spoke to him, the way her laughter came more easily when they were alone. She noticed the gentleness behind his guarded words, the patience in the way he listened. Something fragile began to form between them, like the first rays of dawn after endless night. One evening, after a long day of council debates, Selene invited him to the observatory at the highest point of the palace. The ceiling opened to the stars, and the cosmos stretched above them like a living ocean. She stood by the edge, the wind tugging at her hair, her face illuminated by starlight. Do you miss your home? She asked. James hesitated. Sometimes, but it was not much of a home when I left it. I was exiled for speaking truth to power. They called me a traitor to peace because I refused to stay silent about corruption. I thought I was done fighting battles I could not win. And now? She asked. He looked at her. Now I am married to a princess who might start one. That made her laugh, soft and genuine. The sound filled the chamber like music. For the first time since his arrival, James smiled without effort. They stood there for a long while, two souls from different worlds, bound by circumstance yet drawn together by something neither could name. The stars above seemed to listen, silent witnesses to the fragile bond forming between them. Over the next weeks, the court began to notice small changes. Selene's speeches grew bolder. Her decisions, once questioned, now carried an edge of conviction that silenced dissent. And by her side, always, stood the human, calm, composed, and unafraid to meet the eyes of those who despised him. Together, they unsettled the court. The High Consul, Lord Varen, was the first to voice his discontent. He was tall, elegant, and as venomous as the serpent symbols etched into his robes. He approached James during a royal feast, his tone smooth as oil. You have done well for a man of exile. Varen said, offering a glass of crystalline wine. Tell me, do humans often rise so high through accident? James met his gaze. Only when the powerful underestimate them. The consul's smile faded just enough to reveal the threat behind it. Be careful, human. Not every gift in this palace is meant to be accepted. James placed the glass down untouched. Then perhaps I will stick to water. Selene had watched the exchange from her throne. When Varen withdrew, she approached James and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. You handled him well. I have learned that poison often comes with compliments, he replied. Her lips curved slightly. And you are learning quickly. That night, as they stood once again in the moonlit garden, Selene's expression softened. They will not stop, James. Every day you stand beside me, they will test you. But know this, if they come for you, they come for me. He nodded slowly. Then they had better be ready. In that quiet moment, with the scent of glowing flowers around them and the hum of alien life filling the air, something shifted. She looked at him not as an ally, not as a tool of defiance, but as a man. And for the first time, James saw not a princess, but a woman who had carried an empire on her shoulders and still stood unbroken. He reached for her hand. She did not pull away. The warmth between them was not loud or sudden. It grew quietly, like the slow unfurling of light after endless darkness. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew something irreversible had begun. Weeks turned into months, and the palace began to change. What had once been a place of suspicion and silence now echoed with the quiet pulse of life. The human consort had become a presence impossible to ignore, and Princess Selene, once viewed as a fragile relic of a fading dynasty, now walked with new strength beside him. Every morning, the palace balconies filled with whispers. Courtiers who once mocked now watched carefully, unsure how to treat the human who stood so close to their princess. Some called him lucky, others called him dangerous. But behind the gilded walls, away from the judging eyes, their relationship had evolved into something even Selene had not expected. It began with small moments, the kind that pass unnoticed yet change everything. A conversation over tea that lingered too long. A smile that stayed even after words had ended. A glance across the council hall that carried more meaning than 100 speeches. James had learned to move through the intricate maze of Aelorian customs. He no longer felt like an intruder. The servants bowed with genuine respect now. Even the guards, who once watched him with suspicion, began to greet him with nods of quiet acknowledgement. Selene watched all of it unfold with quiet satisfaction. She had expected this human marriage to be nothing more than political rebellion, a shield against her enemies. Yet somehow, in the midst of deceit and danger, James had become her calm, her reminder that beneath the crown, she was still a person who could feel warmth. One night, as the storm winds howled outside the palace walls, Selene found James in the library. He was sitting near the great windows, a soft glow from the crystal lamps illuminating the pages of an old Aeolorian text. The room was vast, lined with shelves that seemed to reach the stars. She approached quietly, her silver robes whispering against the floor. You read our history, she said, her tone half curious, half surprised. He looked up, smiling faintly. I thought I should understand the world I am living in. Your people have a saying about light and truth. Stars do not hide from the dark. They redefine it. I liked that. Selene smiled, a real one this time. That was written by Queen Lyra centuries ago. She ruled during the Shadow Wars, when the skies burned and Aeloria almost fell. I read about her, James said. She refused to abandon her people, even when the cities turned to ash. She sounds like someone you would admire. I do, Selene admitted softly. She was everything a ruler should be. Brave, flawed, human in all the ways we try not to be. James closed the book and looked at her. The flickering light danced across her face, casting gentle shadows. I think you are not very different from her. Her breath caught. You do not know me well enough to say that. I know enough, he replied. You stand alone against a council that wants you gone. You fight an empire that has already written your story for you. And still you stand. For a moment, she said nothing. The storm rumbled outside, and the sound of rain filled the silence. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "You speak as if you understand what it means to be alone." "I do," he said simply. "Exile teaches that lesson very well." She sat down across from him, her expression softening. "Then perhaps that is why I chose you. Not because of politics or rebellion, but because you already understand what it means to lose everything and still keep standing." The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning neither dared to name. After that night, they became inseparable. They attended council sessions together, shared meals, and walked the palace gardens long after midnight. Their connection deepened, slow and unspoken, yet unmistakable. Selene had begun to laugh again. The sound, once so rare, now echoed through the halls like sunlight breaking through glass. James often caught himself staring, not because she was beautiful. She had always been that. But because her laughter felt like hope returning to a place that had forgotten it. The bond between them did not go unnoticed. The people of Aeloria began to whisper that perhaps this strange union was not a curse but a blessing. The barren princess no longer looked like a symbol of sorrow. She looked alive. One evening, during a festival held in the capital square, Selene and James appeared before the crowd. Thousands of citizens gathered under the floating lanterns that filled the sky with shimmering light. The music of crystal harps carried through the air, and for the first time in years, joy returned to Aeloria. When Selene stood on the balcony, she looked down at her people and smiled. "My beloved Aelorians," she said, her voice carrying clear and strong. "You have called me barren, broken, and cursed. Yet I have learned that strength is not measured by what the world expects of you, but by what you choose to stand for. I chose hope when others offered pity. I chose faith when others offered fear. And today, I choose unity." The crowd erupted in cheers. The nobles remained silent, their faces pale and tight with anger, but the people did not care. They saw something in her they had not seen before: light. James stood beside her, watching as the lanterns rose higher, filling the night with golden fire. Selene turned to him, her eyes reflecting the glow. "Do you hear them?" she whispered. "They cheer for a woman they once pitied. They cheer for their queen," he said quietly. Her gaze lingered on him, and before she could stop herself, she reached for his hand. The crowd saw it, their princess standing with the human she had chosen, hand in hand, united beneath the stars. The cheers grew louder, echoing across the capital like thunder. That night, in the quiet of her chambers, Selene stood before the window, staring out at the city still glowing from celebration. James entered silently, unsure if he should speak. But when she turned, her eyes were warm. "I used to look at this city and see only my failure," she said softly. "Now, when I look at it, I see possibility." James stepped closer. "Then let us make it more than that." She met his gaze, and for the first time she did not look away. The space between them vanished. The air trembled with something unspoken but understood. When he reached out and touched her face, she leaned into his hand without hesitation. No words were needed. The moment spoke for both of them. The next morning, the palace servants found the princess walking through the sunlit gardens, her face serene, her steps light. She greeted them with a smile none had seen in years. The whispers spread quickly through the corridors. Something had changed. The human and the princess were no longer two strangers bound by politics. They had become something much more. For a brief time, peace reigned within the walls of Aeloria. The court, though still restless, could not deny the growing affection between their princess and the man who had once been in exile. It was as if the empire itself had taken a breath it did not know it had been holding. But peace in Aeloria was never meant to last. Beneath the golden beauty of the empire, shadows gathered. Lord Varen and his allies whispered in secret chambers, plotting to restore the order they believed was slipping away. And soon, fate would deliver the spark that turned quiet rebellion into open chaos. It began with a single gasp in the council chamber, a sound that would change everything. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the council chamber, spilling light across the polished marble floor. The air inside was tense, thick with the perfume of crystal incense and the cold glimmer of suspicion. Selene sat upon her throne, her face calm and unreadable, though her hands rested lightly on the carved arms as if holding back exhaustion. James stood behind her as always, silent, watchful, his presence an unspoken warning to the nobles who circled like predators disguised in silk. The meeting had begun as every other, endless debates about trade, border disputes, and the fragile balance of power that held the empire together. But halfway through a discussion on the expansion of the outer colonies, Selene's voice faltered. She blinked, her expression tightening. Her hand drifted to her stomach as if something had struck her from within. At first, James thought it was simple fatigue. She had worked for days without rest, pushing through political resistance and endless paperwork. But then her fingers clenched against her dress, her breath hitched, and the color drained from her face. "Selene." James stepped forward, the calm mask slipping. The High Consul Varen rose sharply, feigning concern. "Your Highness." Selene tried to speak, but the words would not come. Her knees gave way. The sound of her body hitting the marble echoed like a thunderclap. James caught her before she struck the floor, his arms cradling her as the council erupted into chaos. "Get the healers," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. Guards rushed out of the chamber while others cleared space around them. Selene's eyelids fluttered, her skin pale but glowing faintly under the sunlight. "James," she whispered weakly. "I am here," he said, gripping her hand tightly. "Stay with me." When the healers arrived, they examined her quickly, murmuring words in the soft, melodic language of Aeloria. A glowing sphere of light formed above their palms, scanning her from head to toe. Then the head healer froze. His eyes widened, his hands trembling as the sphere dimmed. He turned to the council, his voice unsteady. "This cannot be, but it is true. Her Highness. She is with child." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The words hung in the air, impossible, unbelievable. Then the chamber exploded. "She is barren," one noble cried. "That is impossible. Who dares spread such lies?" shouted another. "The healers must be mistaken." James's heartbeat thundered in his chest. He looked down at Selene, who stared back at him, dazed, confused, and yet beneath it all, a faint spark of realization. The head healer bowed deeply. "It is no mistake. The child's life force is strong. Her Highness carries a living heir." The sound that followed was not joy. It was panic. Every noble in that room felt the ground shift beneath them. Centuries of prophecy, politics, and pride were being rewritten in a single breath. A barren princess, a human husband, and now a child. By evening, the news had spread through the capital like wildfire. Bells tolled across the crystal spires. The citizens poured into the streets, cheering and weeping, unsure if they celebrated a miracle or a mystery. In the royal chambers, Selene sat beside the balcony window, her gaze distant as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet. James stood nearby, uncertain whether to speak. The silence between them was heavy, filled with disbelief and wonder. Finally, she turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said it could never happen." James approached slowly. "And yet here we are." Her hand rested on her stomach, trembling slightly. "I do not understand how. The physicians told me since childhood that my body could never bear life. They said it was my fate, my curse." "Maybe your fate has changed," he said gently. Selene looked at him, tears glimmering in her silver eyes. "And if it has, what does this mean for you, James?" "The child carries my blood, and yours." He took her hand. "Then it means our worlds are not as different as they believed." Outside, the city roared with celebration, but within the palace walls, shadows stirred. The council's joy was a mask. Behind closed doors, nobles raged, their ambitions crumbling. Lord Varen gathered them in secret chambers, his voice low and venomous. "This cannot stand," he hissed. "If the princess bears a hybrid heir, It will end our bloodline's purity. The throne will pass to a creature not of Aeloria. Is that what you want? Others murmured in agreement. The people will revolt if they believe the child is unnatural. Then we must act, Varen said coldly. Before the child is born. The conspiracies began that very night. Servants were bribed, guards replaced, poisons prepared. But they underestimated the human they sought to destroy. James noticed the changes first, the subtle tension in the servant's eyes, the whispers that stopped when he entered a room. He had lived among politicians long enough to recognize danger when it breathed near him. One night, as he poured himself a drink, he noticed the faint shimmer in the liquid, an oily reflection that should not have been there. He set the cup down without a word. Later, a palace maid was found missing. When he told Selene, she paled. They will not stop now, she said. You must leave the palace. And leave you alone with them? His voice hardened. Never. You do not understand what they are capable of, James. I understand perfectly, he said. I have seen men kill for less. From that night on, James refused to be more than a few steps away from her. He slept lightly, one hand always near the pulse weapon hidden beneath the bed. Every meal was tested, every guard questioned. The nobles' smiles grew sharper, their greetings colder. But amid the fear there was also something else, hope. The people adored her now. They called her the Miracle Queen. Mothers brought flowers to the palace gates. Priests sang blessings under the rising suns. Aeloria had found something it had lost, faith. And for Selene, that faith became strength. She began to walk among her people again, her hand resting on her growing belly. James walked beside her, protective but proud. When the crowds reached for her, their voices trembled with awe. Bless the unborn heir, they cried. Bless the union that defied fate. Selene smiled through her tears, waving to them. And when she looked up at James, something passed between them. Quiet, deep, and eternal. That night, she lay in his arms, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the alien moonlight. They called me broken, she whispered. But I was never broken. I was waiting. For what? He asked softly. For you. Her words settled into him like light through darkness. And as he held her close, he realized that whatever came next, betrayal, danger, war, it did not matter. Because in that moment, he understood the truth no empire could deny. Love had done what destiny could not. But the empire's peace was a fragile illusion. In the silence between stars, rebellion gathered like a storm waiting to break. And when it came, it would test everything they had built. The peace did not last. The palace, though bright and filled with song, had begun to breathe with unease. Every step James took echoed too loud. Every glance from a noble felt like the quiet drag of a blade being unsheathed. Selene tried to remain calm, to smile for her people and attend to royal duties, but she too felt it, the invisible hand that seemed to tighten around the palace walls. It began with a whisper in the night. A guard found dead in the eastern corridor, his throat slit cleanly. No sign of a struggle, no trace of the killer. The message left on his armor was chillingly clear. A symbol burned into the metal, the crest of House Varen. James knew what it meant. He had seen the same mark on battlefields back on Earth. A sign of a kill made not for victory, but for silence. That night, James stood at the balcony overlooking the city of glass. They will not stop, Selene, he said quietly. They think if they kill me, your child will die with the scandal. Selene stood beside him, her hand resting on her belly. And if they kill me, the child will never be born. He looked at her, jaw tight. Then we make sure neither of those things happen. From that moment, he became more than a husband, he became her shield. He trained the palace guards himself, turning them from ceremonial watchers into real soldiers. He patrolled the halls at night, studying patterns, anticipating danger. His instincts were sharp. He had learned long ago that paranoia was just another word for survival. But the assassins were patient. The first strike came on a quiet evening. The palace lights shimmered under the twin moons, and Selene sat at her desk, writing letters of peace to distant provinces. James watched her from the doorway, half smiling at how calm she seemed. Then, without warning, the window shattered. A black blur darted through, moving faster than any human. A blade flashed, curved, poisoned, humming faintly with alien energy. James was already moving. He threw himself between Selene and the assassin, grabbing the attacker's wrist mid-swing. The blade sliced across his arm, burning like fire. He grunted, twisted hard, and slammed the figure against the marble wall. The assassin hissed, his skin covered in chameleon shimmer, face hidden beneath a veil. James disarmed him in one brutal motion, pinning him by the throat. "Who sent you?" James growled. The assassin only smiled and bit down on something. A hiss of gas. Then he went limp, lifeless. Selene rushed forward, pale with shock. "James, your arm." "It is fine," he said, though the wound burned with venom. "They failed this time, but they will not stop." Within hours, the palace went on lockdown. The guards sealed every entrance, and the healers treated James with glowing herbs that purged the toxin. But as he lay in the dim light, pain coursing through him, his mind churned with questions. Why now? Why risk open attack when secrecy had served them so well? The answer came the next morning. A message had been sent from the High Council, a formal summons. They wanted Selene to appear before them for a matter of grave importance. James knew what that meant. They were not just going to accuse her. They were going to dethrone her. Selene dressed in silence. Her gown shimmered with pale silver threads, and though she tried to appear composed, her hands trembled slightly as she fixed her crown. James stepped beside her, fastening the clasp of his uniform. "You do not have to face them alone," he said. Her eyes met his. "If I show fear, they will destroy everything. But if I walk in with you beside me, they will remember what courage looks like." The council chamber was a cathedral of power. Golden thrones, ancient banners, and walls carved with the names of rulers long dead. The nobles waited like wolves in a circle, their expressions polite but filled with venom. High Consul Varen rose first. "Your Highness," he said with mock respect, "we gather today to discuss troubling news. The court is concerned, deeply concerned, about the nature of your unborn child." Selene's voice was calm. "You mean my heir?" "Your heir," Varen repeated, smiling thinly. "A child conceived by unconventional means. We must be sure it does not threaten the Empire's purity." James's fists clenched at his sides. "Careful with your words." The consul ignored him. "It is not personal, human. It is law. The throne of Aeloria was never meant to pass to a mixed blood." Selene's tone sharpened. "Then perhaps the law must change." Gasps rippled across the room. Varen's face darkened. "Change? You speak of breaking sacred tradition." "I speak of survival," she said. "Our people stand divided. Our enemies grow stronger. The child I carry is proof that two worlds can unite, that there is hope beyond our arrogance." Her words struck like thunder. Even those who had come to condemn her hesitated. But Varen was not done. "You are blinded by emotion, Princess. This affection for a human clouds your judgment." James stepped forward. "Say what you mean, Varen." Varen's smile turned cruel. "Very well. You are a contaminant, James Carter. A stain upon our throne. And when you are gone, the child will be forgotten." James moved before he realized it. One stride, then another until he was standing inches from the consul. The guards tensed, but Varen's smirk faltered under his glare. "Try," James said softly, "and I will show you how humans deal with men like you." Selene rose, her voice slicing through the tension. "Enough." She looked at Varen with fire in her eyes. "You will not threaten my husband again, nor will you touch my child." There was silence, deep and heavy, until she turned and walked from the chamber. James followed, his heartbeat steady but his mind burning. He knew that after today, the nobles would no longer settle for politics. They would go to war in shadows. That night, under the cover of storm clouds, they struck again. The palace alarm screamed as assassins poured through secret tunnels, their eyes glowing with venomous light. James met them head-on in the Great Hall. The first fell to his plasma blade, the second to a broken spear hurled across the room. But they kept coming, fast, silent, merciless. Selene, shielded by her guards, refused to flee. "I will not hide," she said. "This is my home." "Then we defend it," James said. Side by side, they fought, human strength and alien grace intertwined. When the last assassin fell, the marble floor was slick with blood and silence returned to the palace. Selene looked at him through tears and exhaustion. "They will never forgive us for surviving." James touched her cheek. "Then we keep surviving, until they have no choice but to call it destiny." Outside, lightning split the sky over Aeloria. Inside, a human and an alien queen stood together among the wreckage, battered but unbroken. And somewhere in the distance, in the heart of the capital, Lord Varen watched from a hidden tower, his fury cold and absolute. "This is not over," he whispered. "When dawn comes, the throne will fall." The dawn that followed was not quiet. Thunder rolled across the skies of Aeloria, and the twin suns rose like twin eyes of judgment over the gleaming capital. The city shimmered with unease. Banners were torn down. Armored troops moved through the streets, bearing the sigil of House Varen. The coup had begun. From the palace balcony, Selene stood tall, her silver hair flowing in the cold wind. The storm clouds reflected in her sapphire eyes. Below her, smoke curled upward from the outer districts, the first signs of rebellion. James stepped beside her, his armor marked by battle, the plasma rifle in his hands gleaming faintly in the pale light. "They have turned the army against you," he said quietly. "Varen convinced the generals that your child threatens the bloodline. They are marching toward the palace." Selene's hand went to her belly, protective and trembling. "Then this is the end." James shook his head. "No, this is where it begins." He turned to her, his voice steady. "You once told me you chose me to defy your enemies. But that was never the truth, was it?" Selene's eyes softened. "Perhaps not entirely. I chose you because when you looked at me, I saw the woman I could have been, not the princess they caged." James nodded once. "Then let us show them who you truly are." The palace trembled as the first wave struck. Soldiers of the rebellion breached the outer gates, their armored transports thundering through the courtyards. The loyal guards, outnumbered 3-1, formed a desperate line around the Great Hall. James moved among them like a commander reborn. He had fought on Earth, on scarred colonies where survival meant knowing fear but standing anyway. He barked orders, fortified choke points, rerouted the palace's defense grid. Selene stood beside him, unflinching. Her presence steadied the terrified guards. She was their light in the storm. When the enemy finally broke through, the palace exploded into chaos. Blades met energy rifles, shouts echoed through the marble corridors, and the air filled with the scent of ozone and blood. James fought without pause. Each strike was calculated, each movement precise. He was not just fighting for survival, he was fighting for her, for their unborn child, for something that finally gave his life meaning again. Selene used her royal powers, ancient gifts of her lineage, to summon shields of shimmering energy. Arrows shattered against her will, fire bent away from her body. Her strength, long dormant, burned brighter than ever before. "Fall back to the throne room," James shouted. The defenders retreated, barricading the golden doors as explosions shook the palace. Then, amid the smoke, the doors cracked open. Lord Varen stepped through. His armor was black as night, etched with crimson light. His eyes gleamed with cold triumph. "Princess Selene," he said mockingly, "your reign ends today. Hand over the human, and I may spare your life." Selene stood firm, chin lifted high. "You forget, Varen. I am still your sovereign." "You are a disgrace," he hissed. "You have polluted the royal blood. The empire will burn before I let your hybrid child sit on our throne." James stepped forward, his weapon raised. "Then it burns." Varen smiled and drew his sword, its edge alive with electric light. So be it. What followed was chaos and thunder. James met him head-on. Their blades clashed with sparks that lit the hall like lightning. Varen was fast, trained by the Empire's best. But James fought like a man who had already died once and refused to stay down. Selene watched, powerless for a moment, until Varen fainted and slashed across James's shoulder. Blood splattered the floor. Human filth, Varen sneered. You think love makes you strong? It makes you weak. James, panting, smiled through the pain. Then why are you the one afraid of it? With a roar, he drove forward, parried the next strike, and plunged his blade through Varen's chest. The noble's expression froze in disbelief. He fell to his knees, eyes wide, before collapsing lifeless to the floor. Silence. Selene rushed to James's side, her hands shaking as she pressed against his wound. You are hurt. He laughed softly, wincing. Just another scar. Adds character. Around them, the remaining rebels hesitated. The sight of their leader dead, the princess standing unbroken, and the human warrior at her side broke something in their will. One by one, weapons clattered to the floor. The palace guards raised the royal banner high. The coup had ended. As dawn broke fully over Aeloria, Selene stood before the gathered crowd in the grand courtyard. The people had come. Soldiers, nobles, citizens, drawn by the rumor that the Baron Princess had survived the coup. She stood in her ceremonial gown, her hand resting gently upon her rounded belly. James stood beside her, his armor scorched but his head held high. Selene's voice carried across the courtyard. My people, she began. You called me Baron. You pitted me, mocked me, and doubted my worth. You believed I could not give this empire an heir. But I have given you something greater, hope. The crowd fell silent. She turned to James. I chose a human not because I wished to defy tradition, but because he reminded me of who we are meant to be, strong, compassionate, unafraid of change. He fought for me when all others sought to use me. He stood where even my own counsel would not. And through him, I have learned what it means to love without boundaries. Her hand tightened on his. And now the child I carry is the future of Aeloria, a bridge between two worlds. He will not be known as half-human or half-Aeolorian. He will be known as our king. The murmurs grew louder, echoing through the city like rolling thunder. The nobles who once scorned her now bowed their heads. The people, one by one, began to cheer. Long live the princess! Long live the child! And then, finally, long live the human king! Tears welled in Selene's eyes. James stood beside her, unable to speak, his heart full. As the cheers rose to the heavens, Selene turned to him and whispered, You changed everything. He smiled faintly. No, Selene. You did. I just stood beside you. The suns broke through the clouds then, bathing the city in light. The towers of Aeloria gleamed like silver fire, and for the first time in generations, the empire felt alive again. Love had rewritten prophecy. The Baron Princess was no longer barren. The human exile was no longer lost. Together, they had forged a new destiny, one that no law, no tradition, no hatred could undo. And as the crowd chanted their names beneath the rising suns, the princess and the humans stood hand in hand, watching the dawn of a new world. Their story had begun in defiance. It ended in love, and that love would echo through the stars for all eternity.